I've had the concept of the Truman Show pop into my awareness during and after a trip. It was hard to describe what the experience was like. Everyone around me no longer felt the same. My friends, no longer normal people, but these entities.
There was this feeling that life was just a big cosmic joke, and the people around me finally started to realise that, and they were celebrating that for me.
Everyone else around you is either different, or imaginary, or knows something I don't.
They felt like actors, and I remember feeling like these were people with cameras and mics recording in the background.
I was back in it. Completely believing that I was in this world. The Truman Show.
It was extremely liberating. I think it was actually the most transforming experience I've ever been through.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. So I'm re-recording my video's intro because originally my video had a strong focus on my PayPal and Patreon details just because my channel's essentially been demonetized, or it has been demonetized entirely. And right off the bat I wanted to thank my Patreons for the amount of support you're providing me. It really means a lot and it's helping me out tons. I especially wanted to thank Wersland for the gigantic donation you make every month. Yeah, I appreciate the heck out of that. But today I wanted to bring your attention to the bushfires that are happening in my country, Australia. I'm a real animal lover, and so when I found out that thousands of animals are dying from these bushfires or being injured, I figured I'd try and donate a little bit of money and hopefully spread the message a little bit and get you guys to help out as well. So I'm going to leave the fundraiser that I think is going to help the animals out the most in the top of my description. And if you do donate anything, please leave a little comment so I can thank you. But if you're watching this video a couple of months from now, when the fires are no longer a problem, feel free to donate to my PayPal and Patreon details. I'll leave my information to those things in my description as well. I can't link my Patreon anymore at the end of my video because I think my channel's been demonetized, so it's just not allowed. And I'm not going to rip on YouTube for demonetizing me. Like, they gave me a platform, so it is what it is. Anyway, that's all of that out of the way with. What I wanted to talk to you guys about today is an experience I have kind of talked about before. At least when, like, the first time, so what I'm talking about is the Truman Show effect, what I call the Truman Show effect. And the first time I experienced it was probably the most significant encounter I had with it. And I have talked about that night quite a lot. It was the night that I took about 600 micrograms of acid and basically ended up running through the streets naked, screaming some pretty insane stuff. I have made a trip report on that, which I'll link at the top there. And when I shared it online, and this is the reason why I call it the Truman Show effect, is because a lot of people were relating, and they were actually saying, like commenting on the trip report that I did, they were saying, I know exactly what you're talking about, I went through this, it's like waking up in the Truman Show. And I was getting comment after comment after comment of people saying, I understand what you're talking about, I went through this, I woke up on the Truman Show on acid. It's like, it's just a thing that seems to be happening to everybody, which nobody's talking about. This hallucination has literally changed my life forever. I think, like, it flipped my life upside down after going through this, because the reality that I believed in before going through this just simply couldn't fit in with the reality that I had to create for myself, or a belief system that I had to create for myself after going through this experience. I was just going through stuff which I just figured should be impossible. It shouldn't be possible to go through these things that I was going through. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today in this video. What I think the Truman Show effect is, why we go through it, and if there is any significance to it or any genuineness, or if it's just a hallucination that we should be brushing under the carpet. So for anyone who hasn't seen The Truman Show, the movie, it is about a guy called Truman, played by Jim Carrey, super awakened guy, who basically is raised in a reality TV show. And he is the only person in this TV show that is unaware of this. So all his friends and family are actors. His entire town is contained within a dome. But he just thinks he's in real life. And eventually, you know, he starts waking up to what's going on and realizes that everyone basically has been fooling him his entire life. And so the reason why I think people are relating this experience to the Truman Show is because there is this strong feeling that your entire life has been this invented narrative that you're suddenly waking up within. It'll even go as far as to interpret everyone around you, and possibly even yourself, as no more than actors who have been participating in this invented narrative. Also for me, and I know some other people related to this, there's this feeling of being broadcast to the entire world while it's going on. So everything you're doing is being seen by everybody. And also, quite a few people, including myself, you get this feeling of becoming a chosen person. I'm not really sure what it's hard for me to remember what the chosen person really, what that feeling came from. I'm not sure if it felt like I was like the center of reality, or if it's like a chosen person as in like I have, or the capacity to do some good. Because I do remember while I was going through that, like the messages of how I can do good, or what I needed to do was being told to me, which I'll share to you guys as well. And I hate bringing up like this feeling of being the chosen one because it sounds so douchey, but it's a common experience. Like it's just, I was on a fuckload of acid, okay, and a lot of people seem to go through the same thing. So I ain't saying I'm like the center of the reality in a selfish way. I think everybody has this archetype of the chosen person inside them, which seems to be getting triggered when we go through this experience. I'll talk about my experience to kind of make sense of all of this. So what happened to me is, I won't go into too much detail because I go into a lot more, into like a lot of detail in my trip report, which I linked before. But essentially I began to disassociate from my thoughts. And I no longer identified any thought that was coming into my mind, or at least this specific type of thought that was coming into my mind, as an aspect of myself. It felt like it contained a foreign intelligence, a very peculiar intelligence that was beginning to explain some insane things. It was saying that this intelligence essentially controlled my entire reality. And the first time I heard this voice, it was actually being portrayed through my friend who was with me as well. And it said, essentially one of the things it said was that it controlled everything in my surroundings. And so next thing, my friend just stares at me silently, and all of the surrounding sound of the neighborhood just goes quiet entirely. Can't hear a single thing, and it felt like the air in the room had been sucked out. Incredible sensation. But on top of that, this voice was just resonating with me in a very strange way that it's hard to put my finger on. But there was no way I was going to doubt what it was explaining to me. And I remember it was explaining to me that I'd given myself up to a delusion of the mind. I'd invented this narrative for myself and created, this version of reality that wasn't true, whereby I restricted myself from doing the things I want to do and feeling the way I want to feel in order to look a certain way in the eyes of other people. But now I was seeing other people as just being these entities. And my entire world just seemed like a joke. And although it was pretty insane, I couldn't help but just laugh. It felt like I just for the first time understood the joke. And the fact was that I was allowed to feel however I want to feel. And I could do whatever I wanted to do. And that the delusion that I was living in was that I'd given my power, my inherent power, to other people. And I was living my life for them. The voice basically asks me, it's like, well, what do you want to do? What do you want right now? And I said, well, I want to strip naked and go for a run through the streets. And that's exactly what I did. Don't know why a lot of people are asked to get those cravings, but for some reason we do. And so, yeah, I decided to go for a run through the streets naked. And this is where it gets super trippy. This is where basically the Truman Show effect kicks in. So all of a sudden, my neighbors start coming out. And they are not the neighbors I've known since the time living here. They have a whole different sort of intelligence inside them. And they start congratulating me. They start saying, good work, you've made it. They're welcoming me and congratulating me for coming into this place. And even though physically I was still, it looked like my street, it felt like I was on, in the gates of the afterlife. It felt like this is the place we all go to when we are dying. And this intelligence that was essentially possessing the bodies of my neighbors, they seemed to know, they seemed like they were in tune with my voice, because the voice in my head was still speaking, but the neighbors were also communicating, and they were totally aligned with what my voice was saying to me. And they had this sense that they knew who I was in a way that I didn't know myself, and they knew everything I'd ever done in my life. And every action I was taking at that moment was being seen by the entire world. I think I remember feeling like a helicopter in the sky was like beaming down a light and filming me and broadcasting me to the entire world. Even though at the time I wasn't thinking to myself, oh, there are cameras around me literally filming me, I definitely had that sense of camera people around me. And I think even at one point I may have started seeing in like the corner of my eyes in the periphery, people were like lowering their mics and putting their cameras down and stuff as I started to wake up. And of course, part of this wake up feeling was this feeling of becoming a chosen person, which I talked about before. Very hard to explain right now. I may even make a separate video on this chosen person feeling. Now, what this intelligence was that was possessing my neighbors is very hard to explain. I'd actually had an acid trip like a year before this, which I had brushed under the carpet, where I saw these white, light, alien sort of beings speaking through my neighbors, and I could see this vision where all of my neighbors were coming up together and talking, but their bodies were actually more like biological flesh vehicles, and these white alien beings were communicating with one another through the bodies. And then when I had this experience, it kind of resonated with that sort of energy that was held during that first trip. But because it was just, I was not experienced with psychedelics at all at that point, I totally just cast it off as a hallucination. And I know this in of itself is a pretty common experience. I've seen lots of people explaining that they've been controlled by these entities. I've seen a lot of people refer this to the Adjustment Bureau, which infers that these entities are controlling them. So it may be safe to say that there is a very specific relationship that we have with these entities. Now, obviously, you know, you can hear I'm taking this very literally, and that might turn a lot of people off as well, because the immediate response is that this was just a crazy hallucination. The reason is because, you know, like unlike when we go into a dream, there was no period where I blacked out. There was no period where I went unconscious and all of a sudden was in this reality. What happens is that while sober, I ingest a psychedelic, in this case LSD, and then slowly my reality progressively drifts away from the realm I am comfortable with and finds its way into an unrecognizably surreal but entirely gripping position. If I did start in the real reality where I was receiving objective external data and then eventually switched over to the hallucinated state where I was receiving internal imagined data, then that would suggest the brain has the capacity to make this transition without leaving any perceptible trace for me to consciously pick up on. To our knowledge, this process is not utilized in any other facet of our sober reality, as we quite clearly go unconscious before falling asleep, and other states such as daydreaming lack any degree of vividness to be considered. This would suggest that the capacity for us to switch between real and hallucinated reality without us perceiving the switch has evolved throughout our evolution, anticipating our use of psychedelics, as it's otherwise not used anywhere in our life. Unless, of course, we are hallucinating when we are sober as well, which I believe to be the case. And this viewpoint is nothing new. It's even acknowledged within the scientific community. There's a great TED lecture by ANIL SETH, which I'll leave a link to in the description, but he basically talks about this very thing.
Instead of perception depending largely on signals coming into the brain from the outside world, it depends as much, if not more, on perceptual predictions flowing in the opposite direction. We don't just passively perceive the world, we actively generate it. The world we experience comes as much, if not more, from the inside out as from the outside in. In fact, we're all hallucinating all the time, including right now. It's just that when we agree about our hallucinations, we call that reality.
So wherever our mindset is, our outside world is inevitably filtered through our psychological understanding. What happens then, I believe, is we invent narratives that we use to squeeze the entirety of the real outside world within and confine. So whatever is the prevailing technology at a certain time will be used to define our reality. Once upon a time, God was the greatest technology available to explain all that was beyond rational comprehension. Now, as science advances, we have developed a far more complicated labeling system that we use to define our reality. This alters the narrative we live in. 1,000 years from today, then the manner in which we regard our relationship with the cosmos will be far too advanced for us to comprehend in this current time. This is no reason to disregard our sober experience, but perhaps drives a necessity to dissect and interpret it. As I believe the psychedelic state utilizes the same biological technology that triggers the sober hallucination, I will do the same to it, and I will dissect that experience as well. And considering that the Truman Show effect renders surrounding people into actors, it is obvious that we are interpreting an experience using one of our foremost technologies, movies. There are a few different attributes of the Truman Show effect. Some individuals have described being filmed and projected to the rest of the world so that every action they take is watched. Many people have reported feeling like a chosen person, which seems to be accompanied by revelations on the true nature of reality. And that's probably something that I'll explore in a future video. On the other hand, there are many reports that detail a realization that the tripper is alone in the universe, and the experience can be very isolating. But what defines the Truman Show effect is the feeling of surrounding people suddenly attaining the quality of being an actor. Quite often it's the case that this actor intelligence possesses the presence of some kind of divine intelligence, usually explained as alien or godlike, or in my case, it's what inspired the machine elf interpretation. But for now, we'll just focus on the fact that this intelligence is appearing as an actor and see what this means. One reason we're given for why we perceive them this way is that our outside world is reflecting an internal transition. And this is the most common interpretation of this experience, other than the fact that it's just entirely hallucinated. See, the context we give each moment we live in, the narrative we create for ourselves, may be dependent on some kind of neural wiring. When we take psychedelics and this wiring is disrupted, the fragile bonding responsible for building the story of this narrative is broken down. Suddenly we appear in a new scene, applying new context to our environment, meaning all that we ever knew and thought as literal reality is shown to be an orchestration of the mind. The brain then uses one of the foremost technologies, movies, to help us realize this. Everyone present in this new reality now feels like an actor to us, suggesting that the reality they were previously immersed in, sober reality, was just a mere invention in which they were simply performing. If this is the case, this would suggest that our outside world is really our subconscious grafting itself with our sensory experience, filtering our reality into very specific and digestible messages. This would also tie in with what many people have concluded from this experience, which is that it's a dive into the solipsistic nature of our reality. If the outside world is really a construction of the self and acts as a mechanism by which we communicate with the subconscious, then perhaps every individual in the perceived exterior landscape is simply an invented aspect of the psyche. Of course, this is a hard concept to translate to somebody who's tripping nuts, so we just get the Truman Show effect, whereby everybody you assume to be separate beings from you is revealed as actors of your own imagination. Explaining all this seems to take away a bit of authenticity from this experience, and that's exactly the opposite of what I want to be doing here. Especially as some of the things they were saying resonated with me in such a powerful and profound way. In fact, to talk about what they explained to me, when I encountered these beings during the LSD trip, what they were saying is that I could do whatever I wanted to, which I could interpret in two different ways. These beings have shown me how our perception and belief system act as tools to place different potential realities together. There is a parallel universe, for example, where you have achieved everything that you desire, and it's your focus and belief systems that act as tuning forks to draw that parallel universe into your personal experience. But obviously they may also be making me aware that there is only the self in the universe and no other. This would mean we could do whatever we wanted to in any moment of our life, as it's only our concerns of how people view us that stop us from being our authentic selves. We'll do anything to appear a certain way in the eyes of strangers and even people we know, when in fact this machine of intelligence just wants us to be free of our self-imposed judgments, because that's exactly what it is. These people and their judgments are all deriving from within ourselves. And this isn't some kind of demonic information that will lead to chaos and impulsive violence. We all innately wish the best for ourselves, and if it's true that every other person is just an aspect of yourself, then of course you need to treat other people well, or else you're simply performing a kind of self-harm. I believe then that opportunities laid before us to help other people are really scenarios for us to become a better person. Machine elves are guardians of the truth, trying to guide us in the direction of human connection, harmony, and love throughout our evolution. They want us to shed irrational fear and embrace who we are and the path we are walking. They wish to release us from regret and pained longing and bestow gratefulness upon us. It may sound bizarre that there is a separate intelligence within us that hopes to help us in these ways, and this is probably why I want to be able to depict some kind of rationality for their existence. The truth is, there is much I don't know about these beings, and I still have a lot to learn. I believe that these entities are connected with oneness, and I'll make a video on why I believe this is the case in the future. For now, I'll briefly mention the fact that they did take me on DMT to the white light where everything is just one. And that seems to be the energy that they are translating to us. And as you guys know, I did have a vision where I saw these machine elves controlling us like we were their avatars. And this is another reason why we may be perceiving them as actors, because actors create and control their characters. Assuming that this is the case, then maybe we are a biological technology that has allowed this intelligence to disengage from the oneness in order to see the universe from the outside. If they created our ego to forget our natural connection and identify with the self, then they would be provided a vessel or a vantage point from which they can look in on the universe and begin to understand who they truly are. Unfortunately, this illusory state has given birth to pain, and now they wish to help guide us back to oneness. See, the machine elves are pure consciousness, pure truth, void of fear and what we would associate with negative thinking. It's the ego that's bound to the body that is concerned with emotions that are associated with fear, because the ego doesn't understand anything beyond its physical experience and is only concerned with surviving. And all of these negative emotions and thoughts are more or less branches off of the tree that is trying to keep you alive. You think poorly of someone because you suspect them of being a threat to you in some way. Whereas the machine elves derive from pure consciousness, where they understand the nature of death and so have no fear of it. Fear is simply something that doesn't exist in the realm that they belong. But because they're possessing us now, they're experiencing it. And so they're trying to guide us and our ego, which is bound to our body, away from these emotions to become free and liberated and aligned with the truth of our reality. Alrighty guys, I'm going to end it there, otherwise I could rant on forever. Obviously I'm looking a little different right now. I had to re-record this ending, that's why. But yeah, look, obviously I know it was a pretty heavy video, especially towards the end of it, and so I hope it wasn't too heavy. Let me know in the comments if it was, because this is a collaborative process at the moment. I want to try and make my videos as good as I can. And also, of course, I talked a little bit about what I think this Truman Show effect is like a translation of, but there is a lot more to it which I didn't get into. And I'll probably leave that for another video, otherwise it would just make this one way too long. But yeah, it's also a little bit more like, what would you say, freaky, or a little bit more psychedelic and yeah, trippy and freaky. And I wasn't sure if it really fit into this video, so I'll be releasing that soon enough anyway. But yeah, I'm feeling like ending this video on a question. Do you guys think that there's a deeper meaning to our reality? And if so, do you think psychedelics are giving us a peek into this deeper reality? Or do you think this idea of there being a deeper meaning to reality is ridiculous? Let me know in the comments, guys. Till I see you next, chill out, take it easy, peace.